Hello, I'm Nick Hodges, the Delphi Product Manager, and welcome to another edition of Turbo Delphi Demos. Today we're going to continue to work on our TurboPad application. That is our Notepad clone inside of Turbo Delphi. And specifically we're going to be working today on fleshing out the rest of the file menu. Now last time, if you recall, we created an action list that made it very easy for us to add actions to our application, and that could be then hooked up to UI, user interface items, such as menus. And we created the File Open dialog action that enabled us to run our application and actually open up a file. And in this case, we set it up to look for text files, and so now we can open up a disclaimer file or something like that, and we can view it in our TurboPad application. Now from here we can quickly go and look at our Notepad, regular Notepad from Windows, and we can see that it also has a new of open and save as items. We're not going to work on the page setup and the printing stuff today. And then it also has this nice exit button, which we've actually implemented, but we're going to implement using actions. So the first thing we'll do then is we will add a new standard action. I'm going to scroll down and find file actions. I'm going to add a T file exit action. And that is an action that corresponds to the file exit menu item that is found often in most menus. And there it is. It's there. And now I'm going to bring up the main menu. I'm going to select the exit item here, and I'm going to point it to that new, its action property, to our new file exit action. And once I've done that, I can then go to the on-click event that we previously used to close the form, remove that code, save the application, which will then remove the event handler itself, and now we can rely on the file exit action to actually perform the function of closing the application. And you'll notice now that if we go File Exit, the application closes because the exit action took the action of closing the main form. So basically that allows us to use powerful actions to do much of what it is we want to do. Okay, now that I've talked up actions, of course the next thing we're going to do is create an action for, create a menu item for an action that doesn't actually have a T action for it. A simple action would be creating a new file. So we're going to create a new menu called New, and we're going to give it the caption of New. And once we do that, we can take it and drag it up into the first spot up here, just like it is in our Notepad application, which I need to open and leave open so that we don't lose it. We got File New, and I'll give it the, can quickly give it a shortcut of Control-N, which will match what Notepad does, and that way if you hit Control-N you'll get it. And of course behind this now we want to have the Control-N do something. Now what we want to do is have it do an action. Now of course there isn't a, if you noticed before, there isn't a T file new action. It's just T file open with some other actions, but none of the T file, there isn't one that's for file new anywhere. So what we'll do is we'll just create a generic action, just a new good old standard action. And we'll go ahead and we'll give it the caption new, right? We will also give it the shortcut Control-N, like so. And when we then hook that action up to the action 1, up to the new menu item, you'll notice that it then takes on all of the functionality of, or the characteristics of the properties over here are reflected here. Now an action itself, the good old standard action, we can actually change its name to new action so that we know which one we're dealing with here, has a number of events, and one of them is on execute. And on execute is an event that I can double click, and then I can write some code that will occur in when that new action has occurred. And the basic action we want to have happen here is we want the current contents of the memo control to be cleared. So therefore, we can say memo1 dot clear, and that will clear all of the contents of the memo item out. So we have a new file. Now, if you notice what we're doing so far, we're trying to keep track of this thing called a file name and a file. And you notice that when we hit the new action, we're just clearing out the memo. Well, what if you had made changes and you wanted to save it? Well, you might want to know that some changes had indeed been made, and thus you'd want to keep track of that. You'd also probably want to keep track of the current file name that has been given to the file. For instance, up here in the file open except action, we grabbed that file name, but we just opened it up, but then we sort of forget it. We don't know what it is anymore. So it's rapidly becoming clear that we need to have some type of mechanism or means of keeping track of the information about this file, whether it's been altered or not, what its file name is, that kind of thing. Some very basic information. And this is where we can use a little bit of object-oriented programming. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new unit. I'm going to go add unit here. I'm going to save this unit, and I'm going to call it U file name. And inside of this unit, I'm going to create a type. One we've seen before. I'm going to call it T text file name, just for the heck of it, and we're going to descend it from this good old T object. And we're going to keep track inside of this class of two things. One of them is, and both of them are going to be properties. One of them is going to be called isDirty, and that's going to be a Boolean property, and that property will be used to keep track of whether the file has been edited or not. And once it's been edited or not, we can decide whether we want to save it or not, and save the file or not. And the other property will be simply a good old file name, the actual file name that we're dealing with. And that can either be a file given to the application by the user, or one that has been received from the operating system as a result of having selected the name in a file open dialog box. And once we've typed in the basics here, I can hit Control-Shift-C, and the class completion will then go ahead and create a private section to hold some of the internal storage information and the setter properties here, and then allow us to access these properties and the published properties via the private means here. So the two properties we expose now are the isDirty and file name. Now we're going to need to use this U file name unit name inside of the the main form. So I'm going to copy Control-C over this piece of information, and I'm going to add it to the uses clause here of our implementation section of the main form. And that will enable us to do things like use the T file name class. Now, some of the things you might want to do to a class like this, for instance, is you might want to create a public section that has a constructor, and that constructor could take as one of its parameters the file name, which would be a string, as like so. And then we might also want to create a private procedure called initialize, which we would call inside our constructor. And then let's go ahead and call a constructor. We'll call this one, actually, I'm sorry, create with, just for ease of simplicity here, we'll call this one create with file name, and then we'll call this other one create. Now we've got two constructors, and again I'm going to hit Control-Shift-C to create stubs for these. And of course, whenever you have a constructor, almost 99.9999% of the time you want to call inherited create before you do anything else, and then we'll call initialize. And then here we're going to call inherited create as well, because the constructor is just simply a create with no parameters, the base constructor. And then we'll call initialize. And then, in addition to that, we're going to set the internal field file name to be whatever we passed in as the parameter of the create with file name constructor. And inside of initialize, we'll say isDirty starts out as with the value. We'll set it to true to start out. See how that works. That should work quite nicely actually, because we're going to assume that the file needs to be saved, particularly when we create a new file. However, when we when we open a file, we're going to have to keep track of isDirty and set that to false, because if you open an existing file, it need not be saved unless a change has been made to it. So now we've got this very basic class that does these very basic things. We also we can do some work with it. The first thing, of course, we need to do is we need to create it when the application, create an instance of it so we can use it throughout the lifetime of the application. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to select the item here, and you notice that since we've aligned this memo to cover the entire form itself, there are a couple ways we can get to the form itself. One way is we can select the form here in the Object Inspector, select Main Form. Another way is we could select it here in the Structure pane. That'll actually take us to the main form as well. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to create an event handler for the onCreate and onDestroy functionality of the main form. Because in onCreate, I want to create an instance of tFileName, tText file name. And of course, to do that, I have to have a field to hold it. So I'm going to call this fFileName, tText file name. And then I realized I previously have put this uFileName unit in the uses clause of the implementation section, but I actually need it up here in the implementation in the interface section, so that I can actually use it in the interface section, because I'm going to have to declare a type here. But now that I've done that, I can come down and inside the form create, I can say fFileName gets tText file name dot create, and I'm just going to call create here because at this particular moment I don't know what the file name is. Now in the since I created something, I need to destroy it later or free it later. I can do that when the application is destroyed. So in the onDestroy event, I can go fFileName dot free. Okay, now once I've done that, I can actually create, or I can use this instance of file name. And you'll notice up here, for instance, that we've used temp file name. Well, we're not going to need that anymore, are we? Because our fFileName dot file name property can be used to hold the file name that's returned from this file dialog. And then this same entity here can be used here and here. And as long as all the file names exist, we have that piece of information as well. Now remember, when we open a new file, we also need to set fFileName.isDirty to false, because once we've opened a new file and we haven't yet made any changes to it, the file isn't considered quote-unquote dirty. Okay, now from this point forward, we can use our class to keep track of the information about the file name. And the cool thing is, if along the way we discover other pieces of information that we want to save about the file, we can actually store that information or add that properties or methods or whatever it is that needs to happen on the tFileName, tText file name class itself, and without making any changes to existing code, because we've enhanced the class, not altered or changed it. Okay, so that should take care of the basics of the File New menu. Now, an additional item we're going to add today is the Save dialog, and we'll just add this time we're going to add a standard action, because there is indeed a standard action called tFileSaveAs. So we'll go ahead and add that action in, and then we will go and create a similar menu item. We'll add a new menu item here, and we'll just call it Save. Whoops, I'm sorry. Go to the properties over here, go to its name, and we'll call it Save as such. But in this case, we're going to go ahead and hook up the action File Save As to it. And then we can move the File Save As item up here into the Save As location. And we'll check our notepad, and we'll see that Save As has no menu item per se, or I'm sorry, shortcut to it. So we'll just leave it like it is. And then in addition, we're also going to create a new one called just plain Save, and we'll move that up here, and we will then go ahead and create a regular action that matches up with that, and we'll call that change its name, to save action. And then its caption will give save. Its shortcut key will give the classic Control S, like so. And then we will indeed take this menu item and hook the save action item up to it, and you'll notice that it takes on the properties there. Now, basically at that point we can deal with our actions as opposed to dealing with the menu itself. And again, we deal with actions because, as we'll see when we add a toolbar to this application, that we'll be able to hook multiple user interface items up to single actions in order to centralize the code. So the first thing we'll do is we'll go to the File Save As, and you'll see again the File Save As item has a dialog, and it has some properties. And it also has, again, the onAccept event that occurs when the user presses OK on the File Save dialog. And thus we can create an event handler that occurs when that event takes place. Okay, so what we need to do here then is, at this point, we need to do pretty much the same as what happened up here in the file open, except we want to get the file name from the File Save As dialog, its dialog and its file name. And once we have that file name, as long as that file name exists, well actually I'm sorry, at this point it doesn't matter whether it exists, we should simply call memo1.lines. We're going to save to file. Instead of loading to file as above, we're going to save to file using the fFileName.fileName property. Okay, and now we can go right back to our form designer and our file save action, and we can give it an onExecute event as well, which will do nothing more than just simply save the file as fFileName file name. Okay, so now we should have a very basic application that will allow us to type some text into it, select File Save As. I can save it as this junk text file here that I've already done, and then I can delete it, change it, whatever, go File, New, and then I can retrieve those files if I want to. There's the junk text file, and there's the text again. Now, of course, we haven't used the isDirty property much yet. We haven't really checked anything with it. So in the next one, we'll start showing how we need to keep track of pieces of information like, is the file dirty? Or should we save it before we create a new file or open another file? That kind of thing. But for now, that'll wrap it up for this version of Turbo Delphi Demos. Thanks for listening, and we'll see